Kabulela Dlakavu, research fellow here at UJ, and I've been asked to sort of facilitate this session on public sector reforms. A very important topic if you look at where the world is going, especially with regards to what I would call a three-tier governance framework that you have in most countries, because most of our public administrations need to respond to national priorities. But of course, South Africa exists within a continent as well, so we need to take into account Agenda 2063, and then you've got at the global level the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the UN Agenda 2030, those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So if you look at all those commitments, you need to have a public service that is quite agile and that is quite effective in terms of bringing about results, because at the end of the day, government is there to ensure that people live a good life. And so that's why you need to have individual capacities within the state, but also institutional capacities to respond to pressing challenges.
As you know, we audit all of government. We audit all three spheres, looking at public entities, departments, municipalities as well. Our mandate, which is set out in the Constitution, sees us auditing from an independent perspective, and I think that's quite important to point out. The financial statements, the performance report, which is the service delivery report, as well as the compliance with key laws and regulations that are relevant for financial and performance management. So every single year, these public institutions are subjected to scrutiny by the Auditor General, and there's an independent view and assertion on whether or not the financial statements are credible, whether or not the performance report is useful and reliable, and a view on whether or not, in pursuit of government programs, that public institution has spent public funds in a manner that's consistent with what the laws of the country require. Now, what we are seeing, having been auditing all of these institutions every single year, we find that if you separate it out, let's deal with PFMA, which is the national and provincial level, and then with local government slightly differently. What we find is that PFMA, the entities tend to do well in terms of managing their financial resources. They can get their debits and credits right, so their financial statements are credible, which is an important milestone. In fact, 74% of them get unqualified audit reports, which tells you that they can get the debits and credits right. It allows us then to have a much more constructive conversation with them on improving their service delivery reporting. That's quite important because you've got to get a sense of how they are delivering on the mandates that were given to them, either through the MTSF as well as the annual performance plans that the DPME then also has oversight on.
In the past 30 years, we have seen that there's been a good improvement in terms of your backlogs when it comes to infrastructure for service delivery, which is our focus. And I think in this case, we looked at your water services, and with the very interesting thing is that after load shedding, probably water is our next biggest challenge. For the past 2 days, I didn't have water, by the way. And maybe, as also we would say, water is life, sanitation is dignity. So if we don't have that infrastructure and we don't have that kind of service delivery, there's a challenge. So that's where MISA comes in terms of support. But what we looked at in this paper is to actually say we have been providing support. MISA was established around 2012, and we've done several projects to support municipalities in terms of infrastructure, as well as providing a technical capacity. We've got 82 engineers at the time planted in different municipalities. But also, now the challenge is that we've got different departments providing support. And as my colleague has highlighted, municipalities sometimes don't just have infrastructure as a challenge only. There is dynamics. There is governance dynamics. So as MISA, what we have realized is that no matter how much hand-holding we do, we might not see impact if there is no integration in our hand-holding, if there is no identification of that integrated responsibility and accountability, both from the support point of view from departments, national and provincial, as well as municipalities. So the idea is that the framework that we come up with from the analysis is to say, how do we then identify and look at the different areas in the governance dynamic, be it the audit findings, be it your section 139, be it the municipality strategic self-assessments, because they know what their challenges are. Look at those dynamics, find a way to actually have an integrated approach.
I'd like to start by just anchoring the conversation on the Constitution, because I think that in the 30 years of our democracy, we've got to celebrate this document, the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights that guarantees social justice and seeks to achieve equality. But then the Constitution establishes a governance system that seeks to ensure that, in fact, there is transparency, accountability, et cetera. It guarantees a democratic state through regular elections, making sure that citizens are able to choose their leaders. What is remaining a challenge for our country is the extent to which we are using the governance system provided for in the Constitution to enable the country to achieve social justice as advocated for in the Bill of Rights. For example, the extent to which there is no or there's limited accountability in the current governance framework. You're finding that, in fact, as the AG has said, a lot of maladministration, as an example, exists in different spheres of government, but the accountability mechanisms, particularly the legislature, both national, provincial, and local government level, is not exercising its rightful duty of holding elected representatives accountable, but also making sure that the civil service is actually performing and making sure that the goals as articulated in the Constitution are actually fulfilled.
My message today is that whilst we have done well with universities, we should consolidate that and seek to grow that element. But I think we need to utilize more the research and technology organizations. The examples I wanted to give, 3 of them that we are involved in, we have a program called the Learning Factories, which is a program that's focused on 4th Industrial Revolution skills. You set them up in a factory-like environment that actually does production and teach students, expose them to actual hands-on skills development. And that helps them to get into the market ready. Yesterday, one of the, I think, postdoc students who were here asked the question, how can we be empowered with practical skills? She even said, sometimes even postdocs and PhD students do not have sufficient practical skills. I think that's a very important cry to respond to. And universities, rather, research and technology organizations have not been utilized as much to respond to the practical hands-on skills development. Second one that I wanted to share was the African biomanufacturing skills development. I think we all remember COVID, don't we? And how we didn't have vaccines as a country, or the capacity to even manufacture our own vaccines. We have now an opportunity to actually get ourselves ready, because if you are beaten once, it's okay, it's a mistake. If you get beaten twice, then there's something wrong with your thinking. And so to this extent, I think a facility that we have that actually does upscaling of biotechnology, biomanufacturing, and so on and so forth, to teach the next generation of people who will be producing vaccines in the continent, not just South Africa, in the whole continent. That is what that biomanufacturing skills development program is about. And a third example, last one, is on a 4IR type of skill, which is in cybersecurity. In the whole world, it's been estimated that there's a shortage of about at least 6 million skilled people in the space of cybersecurity.
The Auditor General plays a very, very critical role in our democracy. And, I think its constitutional mandate is very clear and has done very important work in relation to PFMA, MFMA. We've seen that with the municipalities as indicated by the AGSA. However, there is quite extensive evidence that we have reached a point where we have what we can call a dominance of the audit culture. So because, in fact, it's a contradiction because the AGSA has been so effective that the audit culture has dominated across the spheres of government. So on the one hand, you might think, well, that's a good thing, but actually, research has shown that it's actually had quite a profoundly negative impact on performance. And, so I think for us as researchers, academics, government, senior government officials, and government officials in general, we need to then say, how do we deal with that? Because we do not want to weaken the work of the AGSA. But at the same time, because we've seen clearly, instead of an APP, an annual performance plan saying, we commit to creating 1,000 jobs, which is achievable and we know how to set targets and so on. It says one report on number of jobs created. So that's a classic. So you'll find throughout APPs reports. So even if you've done nothing or very little, you can write a report. So I thought let's raise that here because and then, the question of to what extent is audit methodology and the academic discipline of audit applicable in a public policy context, right? Because now we've seen that in its effort to promote public institutions fulfilling their mandate, you now have the AGSA making policy recommendations in certain instances. And, I think maybe the Wits School of Governance, Prof. Maseko might also want to comment on that. Thank you.
I'm sure my fellow panelists will have clearer views on what we're likely to see in terms of the effectiveness of oversight. We believe at AGSA that with change comes opportunity, and we are hopeful and expecting that the makeup of GNU in its complexity and diversity also brings on board within the parliamentary system a new energy and a new commitment or aspiration to be relevant, to be effective in whatever seats people are occupying. So we think that there's a real opportunity that will confront us. It's always worrying when you see people who are experienced in terms of oversight moving into the executive, but I think there's more opportunity than risk as I see it. In terms of the specific questions on value of external audit, maybe let me start here, and I think I'll try and deal with all three questions that were raised around how we audit, the methodology, policy issues, and the leakage issues. At the AGSA, we've also been worried about the sense that far too many auditees worry about complying with audit requirements, right? And pursuing the tick that comes with credible financials, the tick that comes with a credible APP. And yet you're not seeing service delivery shifting. We also were concerned about the lack of consequences when there is leakage and where there are problems. And fortunately, that concern wasn't just ours alone. It was a concern raised by citizens, and the legislators themselves were concerned. And as a result, they amended our powers and gave us powers of enforcement. Essentially, it's complementary powers that allow us to raise matters much more strongly and to follow up on whether or not our recommendations are being implemented. What that means is that we can now serve as part of improving consequence management within the state, working collaboratively with an SIU by referring matters directly to them for further investigations, working clearly and much more collaboratively and cooperatively with the Hawks and referring matters to them for direct attention.
It is a privilege to once again welcome you to the great University of Johannesburg, to this incredible conference, which is the product of a partnership between UJ, the Presidency, DPME, the NSG, and MISTRA. We highly appreciate the Deputy President making time available to be here, given his very busy program. Your presence will elevate the discussion and enhance the conference even more. Ladies and gentlemen, South Africa's democratic transition is an important topic for discussion, and there are few topics more important or worthwhile, and this conference has tackled it comprehensively, dealing with economic, social, and global transformation in the past 30 years in South Africa and abroad. We would like to thank you all for being a part of this discussion. Yesterday's session delved into social, economic, and global transformation, highlighting issues in education, skills development, healthcare access, and inclusive economic growth. Today's discussion, ladies and gentlemen, headlined by a keynote by His Excellency, the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, and members of the National Executive, has looked at public sector reform and will further look at ensuring strong institutions, addressing inequality and building social cohesion, as well as draw insights from international cases. I wish you a great conference going forward. Thank you.
It is with great honor and humility that I stand before you today to share a story of transformation, resilience, and the power of unity. As we gather here to celebrate 30 years of democracy in South Africa, it is important that we reflect on the journey that has brought us to this moment. As a visitor to South Africa, I hesitate to claim I can add more value than the wise elders or vibrant youth who call them this country home. However, I would like to humbly offer a fresh perspective by painting a vivid mental picture of South Africa, past, present, and possible future. My hope is that this vision will inspire the hope we all need for a brighter days ahead. For the past 3 decades, here in South Africa, you have been serving your communities through different streams of rivers. Some were good and generous, while others began to get dry. But today, we find ourselves at a pivotal intersection where at least 10 streams of rivers have come together to form a new, powerful force, to form a new unprecedented multi-party government coalition, a force of a bigger, wider, and more powerful river of good and selfless giving. This is the story in which our kids will read to their kids and say, once upon a time, there were rivers flowing and merging together. As water represents life, public administration is meant to create the life we all aspire to live, for us and for our kids. Just as rivers flow and merge together, forming a delta, we too have been brought together to create a new path forward. This delta, though initially muddy and uncertain, holds the premise of a brighter future, depending on the thrust, content, and conditions of the banks holding it together. This new river may take on different flavors and characteristics. Yet, regardless of its form, our ultimate goal must be to serve the people on the river banks, to provide them with the clean, life-sustaining water they so desperately need. This is the essence of our calling in public administration, and it is what must guide us as we navigate this new and uncharted territory. This leadership is the first angle and pillar of the triangle of alignment in our nations. These are the leaders who are governed by more than the rule of law. Some would call them ethical leaders. I call them leaders with faith. faith that would deter these leaders from committing any wrongdoing, even when the rule of law does not stop them. As we put our efforts into this new amalgamation, we must also focus on predicting the path of these new forming streams. We need to look forward, understanding their conflicts, complementarities, and dynamics. We must understand and respect other streams invading our territories. We must be willing to be tolerant to the different incentives, values, and principles forming our different cultures. We strive to do so and embrace all necessary actions because our paramount responsibility is to provide clean water to our people.
I did receive a report from our team, and we are looking forward to putting the outcomes of yesterday's and also today's conversation into action as we navigate the important work of strengthening our democracy and service delivery. I regard this conference as important and strategic, especially considering that we come out of one of the most complex elections we have ever seen since 1994. The conference gives us an opportunity to reflect on our country's socio-economic trends over the past 30 years, as well as to further reflect on the achievements and challenges we have surmounted as we look into our future for the next 30 years. As it has been deliberated upon in the past day, this reflection must enable us to ensure that over the next 3 decades, we must see meaningful social, economic, and global transformation. In our reflections, we need to show an understanding of the world we live in order to develop appropriate responses that are scientific and evidence-based. This requires allocating resources towards research capabilities, economic modeling, particularly focusing on answering the fundamental policy question of why, what, and how. Ladies and gentlemen, since the advent of our democracy 30 years ago, South Africa has made significant strides in overcoming divisions of the past, demonstrating remarkable progress in social transformation. The impact of democracy on social change has indeed been profound and far-reaching. The advocacy and respect for human rights is the most important way in which our democracy has changed our society. Today, all South Africans, irrespective of race, gender, or class, have the same rights and duties. In addition, this democracy has helped to promote social justice and equality. Citizens have used democratic processes such as free and fair elections to hold the government accountable and lobby for measures to address social injustices and imbalances. This has resulted in the establishment of social welfare programs, affirmative action policies, social policies, and other initiatives aimed at alleviating poverty and promoting social inclusion. The democratic political system's efforts to create an environment that promotes economic growth and development have transformed the lives of many South Africans. We have designed and executed a variety of policies and initiatives to encourage entrepreneurship, innovation, investments, including providing tax incentives to small businesses and also providing development grants and the establishment of incubators, accelerators, and other support structures. While we made significant progress in changing the spatial outlook of our towns and cities, we are going to invest in building developmental, resilient, and strong local government. This is because, as we all know, local government is at the coalface of service delivery. And that is often where we have a lot of challenges in terms of providing basic services to our people. So we are paying a lot of attention to that sphere of government. Compatriots, the world we live in today is characterized by global mega trends such as poverty, inequality, climate change, geopolitical changes underscored by populism, wars, and a growing multipolar world. According to the World Bank, South Africa is amongst the most unequal societies in the world. In 2015, more than a quarter of the population lived below the food poverty line. Moreover, according to findings of Stats SA's annual General Household Survey, released in May of this year, grants are now the main source of income for almost 1/4 of households nationally. The official unemployment rates now stands at almost 42%, an increase of 0.8% in Q1 of this year compared to the fourth quarter of last year. Youth aged between 15 and 24 years and 25 and 34 years continue to have the highest unemployment rates at about 59.7% and 40.7% respectively. So it is quite clear that unemployment hits mostly amongst young people. We highlight these facts because we do not want to ignore the reality of our economy being fraught with challenges. We also do this to emphasize that we recognize that government must strengthen its endeavors to implementing reforms and coming up with innovative approaches that will transform the economy and subsequently the lives of many of our people for the better. In our critical reflections and efforts to come up with solutions to some of the problems that we face, we must have an appreciation of the role that Chapter 9 and 10 institutions of our constitutions have and continue to play in stabilizing our democracy as it relates to engendering a platform for sound public administration as well as protection of all human rights as enshrined in our law. These institutions, alongside sound policies, have made it possible for us to usher in social transformation to the extent that it is seen in our education, health, social welfare, and infrastructure development. While we still have a long way to go, specifically as it relates to dealing with unemployment, poverty, and inequality, we should never undermine the strides that we have made thus far. Ladies and gentlemen, three of the main contributions I wish to deposit into the discussions for consideration are on climate change, intracontinental trade, and global peace efforts. Firstly, we cannot ignore the reality that climate change negatively impacts our economy's development and, most importantly, livelihoods. It is therefore imperative that we think about our economic growth and development in very specific ways. This means that we must consider its implication for trade, finance, and the management of businesses. This week, the President assented to the climate change bill, which outlined the country's response to climate change, including measures for adaptation and mitigation. This bill, which is now an act, also provides for South Africa to lead intra-African trade that is anchored on greener economic pathways that are more sustainable. Second, as South Africa, we must take advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is one of the flagship projects of the African Union Agenda 2063, which is the Africa we want. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a comprehensive scope that includes critical areas of Africa's economy, such as digital trade and investment protection, amongst others. By eliminating barriers to trade in Africa, the objective of the African Continental Free Trade Area is to boost intra-Africa trade, particularly trade in value-added production and trade across all sectors of the African economy. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will help us to move closer to building a better Africa and indeed ultimately a better world. Thirdly, supporting peace efforts on the continent is one of the most important interventions that we can make towards our own social cohesion and nation-building efforts, as well as those at the global stage. We must, as such, treat this issue, or the issue of silencing the guns in Africa, as one of critical importance. Towards this end, we are working with the people of South Sudan to bring about peace and ensure that they can hold peaceful elections in December this year, as they have planned. Together with the Minister of International Relations, we have set up a task team that is now shuttling between Juba and Pretoria to support these efforts. We also recognize the importance of the President's visit to the region recently to ensure that we push our support to efforts to bring about peace, but not only in South Sudan, but also in places like the DRC. The President has once again appointed me as his envoy to work with the people of South Sudan to ensure that we bring lasting peace and also focus on other areas in the continent where there is conflict. The President, as we speak, has just completed meetings with President Salva Kiir who's in the country and amongst others discussing the importance of peace in the continent, particularly in places like South Sudan. Program Director, additionally, we will continue to work with all regional bodies in the continent for peace and development, including the African Union. We will not cease to echo our voices also against global conflict, including supporting peace in Palestine. We are committed to global peace, and our own struggle against apartheid has shaped our posture on these issues and provided us with key experiences and lessons. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to make a few reflections on the political reality of the Government of National Unity, the GNU, that is currently faced with the task of taking South Africa forward in this epoch. Some among you may recall that the process of adopting the 1993 interim constitution and the CODESA process included engaging sectors of society that contributed to the multi-party process, which led to the adoption of the 1996 Constitution. So it was always very important to engage various sectors of society. And you will recall that at the time, President Nelson Mandela also advocated for a government of national unity as we're moving from the apartheid conflict to a democratic society. We have always known that the nation formation process should always be thoroughgoing. As I said at the beginning, this conference is appropriate for asking a critical question as to whether we are on track towards attaining the goal of a socially inclusive and cohesive nation. Responding to this question requires that we borrow a page from our history books, specifically the period in 2012 when we held a social cohesion summit in Kliptown in Soweto that discussed whether we are indeed working towards building an inclusive nation as envisaged in our Constitution and the Freedom Charter. Our vision, as found in the Freedom Charter, is one aimed at building a society based on the best in human civilization in terms of political and human freedoms, socio-economic rights, value systems, and identity. This human civilization should manifest itself through the continuous enhancement of methods to harness our natural environment, transform it into a shared human benefit, and guarantee its renewal for future generations. It should also find expression in human relation management based on political equality and social inclusivity. If there were to be any single measure of the civilizing mission, it should be based on how the most vulnerable in society are treated. The Government of National Unity is therefore guided by these aspirations that underscores the Freedom Charter's call that, and I quote, "the people shall govern." Indeed, this is a historic moment which needs us to draw from the wisdom of one of the founding leaders of our movement, Pixley Kaisaka Seme, who also later became president of the ANC. President Seme had this to say: the demon of racialism, the aberration of the Xhosa Fingo feud, the animosity that exists between the Zulus and the Tongas, between Basutos and every other native, must be buried and forgotten. It has shed amongst us sufficient blood. We are one people. These divisions and jealousies are the cause of all our woes and all our backwardness and ignorance today. Close quote. That was in 1912, when Pixley Sakaseme essentially called for unity. This was a call for unity that we must pursue today. Program Director, more than 140 years since the historic speech by Pixley Sakaseme, and 30 years into freedom and democracy, and guided by the Constitution as adopted in 1996, we are called upon to implement our commitment to the Freedom Charter, which calls us or upon us to build a South Africa that belongs to all who live in it, black and white. The Freedom Charter equally calls us to fight side by side for the realization of these ideals. In the same vein, allow me to paraphrase former President Oliver Reginald Tambo, who envisaged a society wherein, and I quote, "We have a vision of a South Africa in which black and white shall live and work together as equals in conditions of peace and prosperity," close quote. Therefore, the 2024 election outcome presents us an opportunity to return to the task of building South Africa that will no longer be defined by race, class, or gender, but a South Africa where all have equal opportunities. As a testament to the 7th administration's promising start and the commitment of various political parties within the Government of National Unity, we have agreed to develop a common program to create a better, more equal, and a more just South Africa. In fact, I can share with you that when the first cabinet met, the president emphasized the point that the Government of National Unity is not ministers who work for their parties. It is one team. It is ministers that must work for the people of South Africa. So in the cabinet, there is no ministers of DA, ANC, PA. It's one team. And all of them report to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Program Director, for us to reach our objective, the National Development Plan 2030 goals remain the central pillar to guide the development approach, which will inform the outcomes to be achieved by this administration. Therefore, in the next 5 years, our strategic priorities as the Government of National Unity are as follows: to create inclusive economic growth and job creation, maintain and optimize the social wage, build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. Our goal is to encourage fixed capital investments, industrialization, job creation, and the transformation of our people's lives. We remain intentional in investing in people through education, skills development, and providing quality health care. We want to change our community's spatial outlook by building inclusive cities and providing them with services, the program that we today called Building Smart Cities. We call upon all sectors of society to work with us and ensure that ours is a stable, efficient, and effective democracy that brings all people together. As you might be aware, following our successful initiative to rally all parties behind a united agenda, we have now set our sights on deepening this initiative by engaging in a substantive national dialogue as proposed by the President. The national dialogue aims to initiate fresh conversations that tackle relevant and unresolved issues that affect most South Africans, particularly the impoverished. While there is no drawn agenda yet, we are optimistic that a planning process involving political formation and social formations will define the form and content of that dialogue. We do hope that even yourselves will have an opportunity to engage and make suggestions as we move towards that national dialogue. We believe that developing a solid strategy for economic transformation should be at the center of this dialogue. And without preempting the task of the collective agenda setting, that's the point we want to emphasize. But of course, there will be a process to finalize the focus of the dialogue, which hopefully could be convened before end of this year. Program Director, such an approach will have a positive effect on poverty, on inequality, and also unemployment levels that are very high. So we do hope that coming out of that dialogue, we will have had a lot of agreements on programs that will help us bring the levels of unemployment down, create employment, particularly for young people. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout this process, academic and research institutes such as this university have an important role to play. It is these institutions where we place our confidence of where solutions to some of these identified challenges will come from. It is through these knowledge institutions that we believe capacity exists to both theorize and provide practical solutions. Therefore, I invite all of you seated here today to take the lead in providing answers that will harness the potential for South Africa to become the world's finest civilization. In conclusion, Program Director, I firmly believe that our nation possesses sound policies, yet we sometimes struggle with their execution due to, amongst others, a deficiency in accountability. I believe that accountability is essential for successful implementation. Our motto now is to strategically put our policies into action. To deliver results, we must invest in preparation, devise a workable plan, and to be more meticulous in our implementation. We are exploring the concept and science of deliverology as a way to do our work as this government. Through mechanisms such as Operation Vulindlela, in the presidency, we will continue to monitor and strengthen the transformation efforts and improve the lives of many South Africans. Primarily, we will assess the areas that require significant attention to tackle poverty, racial inequality, and economic development. We are now in the presidency focusing on execution, the discipline of getting things done. As we continue to reflect on 30 years of democracy, let us remember the people who gave their lives and fought for freedom, fought for equality and justice. Let us draw inspiration from our collective journey and utilize it to propel us towards a better future. With those few words, I thank you. I'm saying few words because I know that lecturers talked a lot. So I try to cut my speech. But I want to say that we want to thank you very much, Rea Leboga, Siyabonga, Akensa, Inkomo. I've been asked to stay a bit to take questions, but because Dr. Ben Shams is here, you as students must direct more questions to him. Because he's not going to be here from tomorrow. I'm always at UJ, so you'll still catch me. But thank you very much. Ken Sainko.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.